Cheese has been mentioned in historic documentation for thousands of years and has probably been made in England for over 4,000 years. Stilton is often referred to as the King of Cheeses and originates from the Melton Mowbray area. The town of Stilton is situated on the Great North Road in Cambridgeshire. As far back as the 1600s, travellers using this important highway stopped for refreshment at the Bell Inn, Stilton, which was famous for serving a blue creamy cheese. The author Daniel Defoe was a regular visitor to the Bell Inn and was probably instrumental in the cheese eventually being called Stilton. Today the Bell Inn still serves the King of Cheeses, but ironically, although Stilton derived its name from the town, it's the only British cheese protected by a certification trademark and by law can only be made in the counties of Leicestershire, Nottinghamshire and Derbyshire. Thomas Nuttall was a Victorian entrepreneur who made Stilton cheese from his home at Beeby Manor in Leicestershire. Nuttall made the first commercial venture into Stilton producing, creating the first purpose-built Stilton factory. His cheese was predominantly sold in local cheese markets and fairs, but between 1880 and 1890 he won numerous prizes nationally and internationally for his cheese making and for the elaborate cheese displays he created. He was also one of the founder members of the British Dairy Farmers Association. The 7th Duke of Devonshire opened the Hartington Creamery in the mid-1870s. He set up this business with his tenant farmers, but as many others it struggled against cheap imports and eventually closed in 1895. 5 years later, on the 1st of April 1900, the Nuttall family purchased the Hartington Creamery, and Thomas Nuttall's son, John Marriott Nuttall, built up a successful business. The company became limited in 1916. Sadly, Mr Nuttall died in 1917 with cancer following a long illness. Joe Brindley, who had been a loyal employee for many years, ran the factory with Mrs Nuttall and eventually became manager. Joe continued to build the business and in 1926 received the grant of a royal warrant. He oversaw a major extension to the building in the 1920s, but in July 1929 a fire caused by a paraffin heater destroyed much of the original building, which had been made of tarred wood. The fire happened in the middle of the night, and many people heroically evacuated the stored cheese from the factory into a local field. Some local villagers are still able to recount what took place at the factory on that dreadful night. Following the fire, the Hartington Creamery was rebuilt and continued to win many awards for its produce. In the 1940s, Joe Brindley became the majority shareholder at Hartington Creamery and also acquired 2 other creameries in Leicestershire. His business at Hartington continued to run successfully with the help of his daughter Marjorie. In 1962, the business was sold to the Milk Marketing Board and became a division of Dairy Crest Foods in 1982. Over the years, the Hartington Creamery has won numerous awards for its cheese, and it's now the only remaining cheese factory in Derbyshire. The rolling hills of Derbyshire provide lush pasture on which the dairy herds can graze. This produces milk which is excellent for Stilton cheese making. The milk provided by local dairy herds is regularly collected from the farm in huge tankers. A hose from the tanker is coupled to the milk vat and samples of the milk are taken. Computerised equipment monitors the amount of milk the tanker contains. Each tanker is capable of holding up to 15,000 litres. The collected milk is quickly transferred to the Hartington Creamery, where samples are once again taken. The milk is pumped from the tanker and placed into massive storage containers. It is then tested, cooled, pasteurised and clarified. The vat room contains 13 vats, each of which hold 4,500 litres of milk. The temperature is controlled at around 21 degrees centigrade. At the beginning of the cheese making process, milk is poured into a vat and samples are taken once again. A starter culture is added to sour the milk, and this begins the process of forming the curds and whey. With the milk at 30 degrees centigrade, rennet is added. This takes approximately 45 minutes to set the milk. The stirring and cutting is still done by hand. Following cutting, the curd settles for 45 to 50 minutes. It is then transferred by pipe to another vat. The liquid whey is then allowed to settle once more. Once the curd has settled, it is cut again and then left to drain off overnight. The next day the curd is cut into 3 to 4 inch cubes. Stringent tests are carried out to ensure the acidity is correct. Once this is found to be correct, salt is added for flavour and preservation. After the salt has been mixed into the curd, it is placed onto a conveyor belt which takes it to the cheese mills. When the curd has passed through the mills, salt is again added by hand and mixed in. The traditional methods of Stilton cheese making are still employed at the Hartington Creamery, which has more than 120 employees. The curd is then placed onto a conveyor belt, taking it to be weighed. Once the curd has been weighed, it is then placed into plastic hoops which forms the shape of the Stilton. Each hoop contains 10.5 kilos of curd. The plastic hoops pass through to the hoop room on plastic plates. Moisture from the cheese drains out, and the weight of the curds eventually compacts the cheese. It loses most of its weight during the first 5 days. The cheeses are turned out onto a board and put on a shelf. The temperature during this time is 21 degrees centigrade. The cheeses are turned once a day in the hoop room, and on the 4th day are put into the coating room overnight at 16 degrees centigrade to firm them up. The next day the hoop is removed and the cheese is rubbed with a knife to seal it. The Stilton is then taken into the cheese store and kept there for up to 16 weeks at a temperature of 10 degrees centigrade and humidity of 91%. Over this period the cheese matures. The cheese stands on cloths for 4 weeks, then is turned twice a week. The cheese store holds up to 90,000 cheeses, and the factory produces over 2,000 tonnes every year. 3 weeks prior to sale, the cheese is pierced evenly to cause air to enter it, which stimulates the famous bluing process. Once the cheese has been pierced, the temperature is raised to 12 degrees centigrade and then gradually lowered to 2 degrees centigrade as the cheese gets older. The cheese grader makes certain that the cheese has a good appearance, that it's fully blue, and that the texture, flavour and aroma is all in balance. Throughout the whole of the cheese making process, tests are regularly carried out under strict conditions in the laboratory. At the end of the process, the cheese is not cleared for final release until it has passed a positive release test. At the end of its storage, the Stilton passes through to various packing departments. The cheese is packaged individually for many high street stores according to their specification. Pre-packaged Stilton forms over 75% of the business at Hartington. Stilton has been built into our Christmas eating traditions more and more over the years, which has caused a huge demand for speciality packaging. Stilton in pots has become extremely popular, and more recently Stilton packaged with a bottle of port, which makes an extremely attractive and welcome gift. More than 10% of the cheese produced at Hartington is exported, mainly to the USA, France and Germany. But the majority of cheese is distributed throughout the UK. Many of the larger high street stores such as Safeway, Asda, Tesco and Marks and Spencer are supplied with Stilton made at Hartington. Specialists in fine food also sell Hartington cheese. This includes the Chatsworth Farm Shop at Pilsley, Derbyshire, which is part of the Duke and Duchess of Devonshire's estate. The old cheese shop in the centre of beautiful Hartington village is the creamery's own retail outlet. The shop was first opened during the 1980s, and it is here that you can see many of the certificates and awards these cheeses have won over the years. The shop is popular with locals and tourists alike and sells a variety of cheeses, including the famous Hartington Stilton, the Buxton Blue and the Dovedale Blue. The Hartington Creamery will celebrate 2 anniversaries during the year 2000. It will have been a cheese producing site for 125 years and will have manufactured Stilton cheese for 100 years. The traditions and skills still used by the Hartington Creamery are a firm foundation to take it forward into the next millennium. A book written by Trevor Hickman on the history of Stilton cheese is available from most good bookstores.